Hello, and welcome to another podcast for the Career Hive. I hope you're all having a fantastic and brilliant week. So we thought that this week or this version or episode of our podcast will focus on something that's in the news right now, that's happening as we speak, and I'm sure we all enjoyed our result over the weekend as we overcame Senegal, and we're all looking forward to seeing us play France on Saturday. And one thing is definitely true. I truly enjoyed the Brazilian performance yesterday. You know, that was Brazil at its best, right? Samba. So thought this week we'd do a sector that not only is in the news, but also one that has a personal connection with myself. So we're going to talk about careers in football. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at what does it look like, right? So, yes, we see the Brazilian boys do their samba. Yes, we see Jude Bellingham performing the way that he did, and we see the Gareth Southgates of this world and the managers and everybody talks about that front line. And yes, we see the likes of Gary Lineker, and we kind of connected to their days of playing football, etc. But there's so many other things that happen in and around the world and the careers or in the world of football, where there's some really, 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 truly exciting careers. And as a parent who has a teenager who's embarking on that journey of focusing and pushing to become a professional footballer, what's really resonated with me is the conversation that it's the first time in probably my life where I have a conversation with my son and I say, well, you've got to have a plan B, right? What else? And it actually dawned on me when I was preparing this, and I was thinking, but that's never been, my kind of philosophy on you have to have a plan B or you have to have a plan C. But it's football, right? And that's because we kind of look at it as the professional footballer being the holy grail of what a career in football looks like. So as I went away and I thought, it's not my place anymore to say to him, you need a plan B or a plan C or a plan A, whatever that looks like. It's about saying, what is the opportunities in a space that he has a huge amount of passion for, a space that, he understands, he's got, he's building connections, he's got friends, he's got all those type of things that are involved in that. And actually, it might not be that it's a professional football. And even if it is a professional football route, the reality is that career will end at 35. And maybe that's why we talk about the long-term longevity of that career, how quickly, you have to have something else in play. You have to have a look at, what else is out there. So I thought we're going to do this right on this particular podcast. We're going to go for something that we're going to talk about careers in football. We're not going to talk about them as backup plans. There are no plan Bs and they know kind of choosing something else, right? This is just purely a career in a space that a young person in early careers loves to be part of, enjoys, or anybody enjoys being part of, including someone like myself. So let's talk about it, right? Let's look at the space that is football, right? And we hopefully can connect some of the really exciting opportunities that so spaces and sectors and opportunities within football, and we connect them to some of the examples, and hopefully you start to see how much this sector links into anything. So if I'm looking at what decision to make as I move out of my next phase of education, whether it's 16 and I'm looking to go into an apprenticeship, with 18 I'm looking to make a decision to go to a higher degree apprenticeship or university, or I'm coming out of university with a qualification or degree and I'm deciding what do I want to do next. If I'm a parent talking to someone in my life, my son, my daughter, my nephew, my niece, my cousin, my best friend's child, wherever that may be, it's about being able to connect the dots, bring it all together. And like we say at Future Match, it's all about joining the dots, the careers, the pathways, and the companies, all that in the middle for this young person or this individual. So 6 main sectors. First of all, there's business and commercial, right? So, we'll go into detail with each and every single one of these. So you've got business and commercial. You've got the coaching and player development. So that's really recognizable. And I think that part, and what we'll do is some of them, we won't probably go into great detail because we kind of know what they are, but we'll talk about some of the exciting things that I've seen coming through, having someone in that sort of space. The broadcast media and technology space, stadia and operations, education, governance and community, football products and apparel. So, think about all those kind of things. So when we just go back into that, right? So when we look at the kind of the business and commercial space, we break that down and we look at finance, right? The biggest deal that happened this summer was Chelsea being acquired as a football club. The next biggest deals happening in the pipeline is the potential sale of Manchester United and Liverpool. And when you look at what's involved in those deals and the sums of money that's been talked about and the appointment of the investment bankers to come in and look at what needs to happen, that's a career, right? So we talk about young people going in, look at a career in finance and accounting. But what if I don't want to do finance and accounting in a business environment in terms of, buying and selling of companies, or I don't want to go into private equity in terms of doing deals with business? What about if I don't want to be an accountant in the firm that we look at as, supporting businesses, a CFO, etc. But I actually want to do this, but my love is football, right? My love is football because being in an environment, I either played it or I just have a love for it and have a passion for it. Well, there's a huge career in this space because there's a finance deal that has to be found, right? So Chelsea went for something like £4 billion. There's 2.5 billion of that had to be financed and borrowed. There's people who are having to go out there and raise that kind of money into the kind of the football club. So you look at it from a buying and selling perspective. Then you look at it from a revenue perspective for clubs, right? How do we maximize the revenue of our product? How do we maximize the revenue of our players and our teams, and how do we reach out to our community? All that type of stuff. There's a huge amount of effort in there. Then you've got the players themselves, right? There's a financial wealth of the players because yes, these young people are earning extraordinary amount of money, but that has to be invested in the right way and has to progress. So there's a huge potential for young, for talent, for a career in that. Then we go into the marketing piece. So we're still talking about business commercial. And we know what's out there, right? We know that there's a huge space around what does this look like, and that's just how do we market the product that is our football club, right? And this is, forget about a Premier League club, right? I'm thinking about remembering Leo's, when you're playing in grassroots, we are lucky we have a pyramid of great historic football clubs or sporting venues whereby these are being, going around for 100 years. And I turn up a ground and I'm like, oh my gosh, my son laughs at me because I'm frantically Googling the fact that we've gone to play, in Dudley, and we find out that the stadium at the time, this club started in 1934. And I'm like, wow, what's the history behind it? What's the background behind it? So, there's, that's across the pyramid that you look at those marketing opportunities. So it's how do you market the club? How do you market your players? And how do you engage with supporters? Everything is involved in that. And that's a wide spectrum. And we'll drive into those individual spaces, but just kind of giving you a flavor of what sits within the business and commercial space. Then you've got the agents or the intermediaries they call. This is both the buying and the selling of players and the player welfare and how you support that player as they pull together their different deals. There's a partnership deals, right? Between, this is bigger than sport than the sponsorship, right? This is more around, which charity are we going to partner with? Which good cause are we going to be part of? It's really a crucial part because for football clubs, they have a multitude of stakeholders. So therefore, someone, so if you're coming in there and you're really passionate about, kind of engaging with the wider community, and that's where your passion is, a football club and a football space, a career in football exists, if you want to look at it that way. Then obviously the legalities, right? The buying of a club, the buying of players, the HR contracts for people that work in the football clubs, all that type of stuff. And some of the fascinating ones I found was business development, right? So who goes out there and you hear about these commercial deals that are happening. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're Man City, Man United, all the way down to, step 9, step 10, there is an element of business development that takes place. The leadership, how do I lead that team, both as a CEO, as a director of sport, as the manager, as a first team coach, as the head of HR, as the head of commercial, all those type of things are part and parcel. We talked about that sponsorship that means from players to clubs. We talked about the next biggest thing, which I really see kind of developing at a rate of knots, is around brand, right? Because, I think if I'm correct, Karim Benzema, it was Kylian Mbappe talked about the fact that he didn't want to be seen to be advertising alcohol because he has strong beliefs about, against alcohol. And of course, Budweiser are sponsoring the FIFA World Cup, and we know the challenges they had there, and you're supported by the French Federation, and so players are becoming aware of their brand, not just from how can I make money on this brand, or the money I can make from my brand as who I am, but also it's around my personal values and my brand, and so who's out there managing and supporting that, right? Because again, a lot of these footballers are kind of starting to build their own units around themselves. So this is another career that you kind of look at, and that kind of sales and account aspect of what they do. I looked at coaching and development, right? Because I think this is probably one of the fascinating spaces of development. And, my son's 16, and seeing how this has evolved just in the 12 years since he started. So he started playing when he was 4, and just seeing the development of what's happening in that space is huge. And you can see it in the game that we watch. People are asking, how come that we have, by yesterday's game, I think with Korea, but when you look at anything else, how come we have countries that we deemed to be not necessarily footballing hotbeds doing so well? And we go back to the scouting analysis, right? The availability of data, the ability for football teams to scout and understand players and understand teams and be able to do that, whether they go to the game live or whether they're able to watch it on TV. This has been probably one of the biggest developments in there. So when you look at it from a career perspective, the role of a scout is no longer that person who, has a look at a player and goes, right, they look good. There's so much analysis that goes into it, right? The amount of sprints you do. Are you left foot predominant? Do you go inside? Do you go outside? How do you shape? How do you take your penalty? What's the free kick motion? There is so much that happens in there. And that analysis is just about how we then go and play against that team, or how we go and acquire that player. So that's really, really crucial. Then the sports science piece, where, the reasons why they're probably a lot more small and skillful players comes down to sports science, because the recognition that, we're not just looking at the bigger player at those age groups, and that's the one that's going to evolve quickest. It's all about understanding how the body works. Right? How do we recover? How do we develop? How do we grow? How do we cause muscle strains? How do these things happen? What do we need to warm up? What do we need to have afterwards? How do we perform at our optimal level? And probably sports science is something that sits right across the center of the business, and you see the uptake in qualifications within that sort of sports science space, and it's something that's going to evolve and grow even more. Okay, you got sports psychology, and I think this is probably one of the biggest parts of it all. When you look back to, the importance of what this means, that it's not just being physically fit and prepared. It's about, where does my mental mind fit that? How do I feel emotional about? Where do all those type of things happen? So if you're a young person out there thinking, I don't want to play football, but, I want to go into the medical side of things. How about being that sports psychologist, right? It's a big, big space within the football space. Then there's the specialist coaching, right? This is really come on leaps and bounds, where if you're a winger, you're a striker, you're a defender, you have specialist coaches that look at it. There's specialist coaches around how they take free kicks, how they do corners, how they defend and how they attack them. And again, that's something whereby, when you come to coaching, there's a set that you might not want to do that as a role per se in terms of the whole coaching plan, but this is something that you really enjoy, because you get a kick out of watching how players stand in position and where the tactical nous comes into play, right? Then we have the big one that we're hearing about, sporting director and director of football, because again, imagine your role is that, we talked about the leadership, the marketing, the business development, but also it's, you've got this vast departments of which are looking after football players across the board, on loan, off loan, scouting the next big thing. Someone has to coordinate that, because the role of the manager is becoming a bigger role. So imagine if and a lot of these roles, by the way, are now being filled by individuals who are not directly from a football playing background. They're a bit more analytical in how they think. They've got really good leadership skills. They've got an ability to communicate. They've got a presence around, experience and knowledge of the history of football and the history of that, league and the club and everything else like that. Because when you're looking at all that type of stuff, this is what you're kind of taking the role. So again, a fascinating career that's really growing. And then we look at it this way, right? Let's think about, the journey up to the football ground, right? So you've gone for your pre-drinks and your pre-meal and all that type of stuff. But think about what's happening when you arrive at that ground, right? So think about some of the careers that come into play. So the ticketing officer, the security around the stadium, all those type of things. And what was really fascinating for me is Leo had his first academy game. And the first thing he did when he turned up at the time is, he kind of, he's so used to having to get himself ready for the game, right? So grassroots football, right? I'm going to get ready, 9 out of 10. He's kind of 50% ready, then the 50% happens in the car, and then he kind of runs in, gets his drink bottle, off he goes. And so we were preparing for his first trial he was going to, and they were asking him to turn up for them. And he basically arrives at the ground and said, Dad, have I got, and parents would get this or understand this, have I got my half-cut socks? And I'm going, but Leo, they're kind of playing a green and maroon color. I said, so we don't have those half-cut socks. Oh, gosh, and, of course, football players, I guess, a little bit superstitious. In he goes to the dressing room, and I see him walking out. And I'm smiling to myself because he's got the socks on. And I'm thinking, oh, he's not going to be very happy. But I could see underneath the socks that he had these non-grip socks, a new thing that's around. And after the game, I said to him, he goes, Dad, walked in there and our kit was laid out, right? The kit was laid out nice and tight with socks. And he said, on top of not only do we have our socks, you could choose whether you wanted half-cut socks, so you could put them over your non-grip boots, and you could have the socks, the normal socks that you wanted. So but everything was laid out on the hanger and everything else like that. And so when we're doing this podcast, I was thinking about the importance of that role, because the whole piece around that kit person understanding what each player wants. And by the way, obviously this is at a kind of academy level. It's very different when you go to the first teams, but the reality of that role being the same across the board, where do our players, I need to understand what kind of studs they're wearing, the socks they want to wear, the boots they're going to wear, the kit needs to be out, the pre-warm-up, the warm-up, the game kit, the post-warm-up, everything needs to be laid out in a way that all that player does is turn up and do their job. What a wonderful job. And when you look at football teams, when they win, the person who's probably in the middle of the biggest celebrations is the kit, the person who's responsible for the kit. So how exciting is that if you're potentially looking at that from a career? Because you're right in the essence of the success and the failure and the pre-talks. I mean, that role is probably the most influential when you look at it. Then you have the HR piece around the operations, around the stadium, around the players, all that type of stuff. You've got player care. You've got events and projects. So nowadays, if you look at the fact that, stadium, it has to be kind of a 365-day generating revenue. There's huge events that can happen. So you could have a football match, you can have a rugby match, you can have a concert, how do we use the executive boxes? So smaller events are happening, even though there's not a football match happening. So award ceremony, all that type of stuff. So there's a lot of opportunities. So we go back to the event marketing, event operations, business development, all those type of things start to come into play as you kind of scope out that route. And of course, the food and hospitality space, right, is so big, because I'm not just looking at how I entertain the fans in the stadium, but it's also how do I make sure the players are eating properly? How do we make sure that we have the different hospitality groups all coming together on that basis? And then a big space I think is also developing massively is because there's an understanding that, look, not every single young person who's in an academy or who embarks on a journey of being a footballer is going to be a footballer. So how do we look at that kind of education piece? Let's look at the kind of the governance of what we're doing as a game, and let's look at how we embrace and engage with our community. So, we have a much more push on equality, diversity, and inclusion. And that's a big drive because, if you look at the fact that the women football team did us proud and did something that the men couldn't do in the Euros, which is win the Euros. You look at officiating, the fact that we've had female linesmen, we've had female referees, I can't wait for that just to be the norm, right? And seeing that. And what I will say, is that as much as the negative publicity around officiating can be, without officials, there is no game. And when you look at the role of referee, I don't think there's any other role that has so many facets or skills that you need in order to be really successful. I have to be decisive, right? Okay, yes, I have VAR, but I have to have the conviction in my decision-making process, whether I go back to VAR and whether I don't. And in most predominant games, they don't have VAR, so they're making those decisions. The ability to communicate and to do so clearly, to provide leadership, to be able to lead, two opposition teams, the managers and the supporters, and be able to kind of manage that. At the same time, being able to remember the law book and apply those rules and laws as you've been trained, I think is huge, right? So if you look at that, the fitness that they have to have, the ability to, the emotional intelligence to be able to understand, what, I'm dealing with a certain type of personality and therefore I have to let this go, or, however that looks like, I think is probably one of the most fascinating roles. And so whether you're running the line or in the middle of the pitch, officiating any game, I think, to me, it's one of the most fascinating careers in there. And then we've got your support and engagement, which is really around how players and clubs support both the clubs support the players, how the players need that support outside of that, but also how we look at our support engagement both as a football team as well. So as a club, how do we engage with our supporters? Because they're the ones who provide the revenue. If I'm a footballer, how do I outreach to that supporter group? And this is fascinating because everybody talks about when you look at the big clubs, right? But I remember, and we do this anyway. We go to our local team and we'll go and watch Solihull Moors. We've been to watch Racing Warwick. We've been to watch Leamington play. And you turn up there and there's probably 800, maybe 1,000 fans if you're lucky, maybe 1,500 depending on Solihull Moors is slightly bigger because of the National League. But you go into those kind of spaces where there's a smaller group of fans. But the engagement between the fans, the club, the players is immense, right? So again, it's who's responsible for supporting that engagement of those players, who's reaching that out. And we go back to how does that link to our marketing? How does that link to digital marketing, our tech platforms? How are we doing that? Again, you start to see the peripheral careers that kind of come into play when we kind of looking at that. I think another big space of it is the education piece, trying to make sure that there's, there's education within the clubs outside of that. How is that in PE? If we're going to schools and we're going to colleges and universities and nurseries, whatever that looks like, there's that education piece there. So, if I'm into teaching, but I don't want to teach in that way, you can specialize in aspect of there. I think what's really exciting is the further study and research. So, if you talk about, the headline around, is heading safe in football. So imagine, I'm doing my research and I want to be in medicine. How interesting is it to look at something like that? So how are we going to research that? Is it going to be a case of heading stops, but we're going to use different kind of footballs? What does the impact on the game have? The materials used on the football kits, on the football boots to prevent injuries. There's talk about, majority of female injuries, female football injuries happening at certain times due to the cycle and all that type of stuff. So it's, well, how can we research that? Or do we change our training methods? I just think this is what I mean. This is the fascinating world of where we are in football. So let's move away from, the footballer who's, playing on the pitch and earning all these millions and all that type of stuff. And let's just look at what is happening around that kind of sport, that without these aspects, then a footballer doesn't play to 37, 38 like Ronaldo. A footballer isn't still closing down at 35 when in reality, if you go back 20 years ago, the view of a footballer playing at Ronaldo's age was pretty much unheard of. The oldest player I remember watching was Roger Miller in the 1990 World Cup, but you look at how he played, he was only coming in for 15, 20 minutes here and there, and making massive impact. But you look at the advancement of the pitches that we play on, right? So how do we work out the pitch to keep in pristine position to be that place? All that stuff is about that further study, that further research into all aspects of the game, and someone who could really be part of that. Then the biggest part I love is the voluntary side of things, right? Because, as I said, being part of the grassroots football coach myself, all that type of stuff. I think the essence of, the reason why we have the Jude Bellingham we have is because of the grassroots days that he had when he started off at Starbridge Town, right? The referee who was getting their £25 an hour, the coach whose son who most likely paid with you, the assistant coach whose son probably paid with you, the linesman that was mom and dad's running the line, the club secretary who was part of that Sunday league, and bringing together 25 different teams, working out who's playing who and when, administering the fines and all that type of stuff. I mean, there's so many aspects, as well as doing their day job and everything else. So to me, there's so many aspects, and we'll talk about how you can use those to kind of work your way into a career in football anyway. So, and the most exciting part of that is what they call football products and merch, right? I love the word merch, right? So, think about the fact that, the designs that are coming out now, the kind of football kits that are being used to retain more heat, use less, energy, all that type of stuff, right? That kind of comes into play. And then from the player and the club piece, the fact that before it was just about, hey, look, I'm just gonna buy my football kit, right? My home or away top. Now it's everything, right? Now it's literally everything from you could have the whole tracksuit. You could, but not just there's my football tracksuit, but you can literally buy. And I'll give you an example. I think Marks and Spencer are the designers for official England wear. You can literally go and buy a whole jumper kit and you wear it and no one will know that it's actually England, but it's designed by England. And the whole reason being is that we're kind of designing stuff that I'm wearing because I'm kind of carrying my colors, but I don't need it to be highly visible to say that I'm wearing an England top, etc. So I think there's a wonderful space. So if you're in fashion and you're looking at how those things get designed and then how we pull those together, you got the players building their own brands, clubs building their own brands, and widening what that merch looks like because they know it's a revenue stream, right? Logistics, right? Think about, as I said, everyone, when you look at how a football team moves around, what happens when they're there, what needs to happen when they get to the point of arrival, from the kit, from the training gear, the logistics if it's a World Cup and all that type of stuff. There's some really exciting careers within it that link into that supply chain, right? So, again, it's understanding what those kind of career pathways and routes look like. I thought the word software developer, I was like, yeah, of course there is, right? So we're building platforms so we can, when you look at I think it's a Moneyball, I can't remember what they called it, but it's basically how the likes of Brentford go about hiring and scouting players. Again, that's data analysis on a platform, all the different things. Well, someone has to build that platform, right? Someone has to develop that platform. There's a chip right now in the football that made that Cristiano Ronaldo couldn't be awarded a goal. Again, that's someone who's having to develop what that looks like. The VAR piece, the cross-line, goal line technology, all that type of stuff kind of fits into this sort of space. And of course, we live in a world of e-commerce and online. So to me, there is a huge opportunity for careers. So hopefully what we've done in this podcast is just kind of say, look, when you sit there and you're watching England v France in the next game, let's have a look around the players, the occasion, and just understand the different roles that are involved in bringing that game live to us, from the broadcasting part, from the runners behind the scene, the radio, YouTube, Twitter feeds, all that type of stuff, to the kit that's being worn by the players, to the logistics to get them to the ground, to the planning that's taking place of who's going to talk to who from the manager's perspective. And it's really good. It's something that I'm doing a lot over the World Cup, the 16-year-old time where we sit down, we kind of try, even though, he doesn't really say much when it comes to that because he's 16, right? But we kind of trying to have the little conversations around, I wonder, how does that kind of fit in there? What does that person do there? Because what we're trying to do is just engage. So most importantly, there's an appreciation that without these different careers within my job as a footballer, that I wouldn't be able to perform at my best. But most importantly, also to kind of go, you know what? I actually love that. I'm really interested in that. And therefore, that may be something that ends up being the case if the other route doesn't take place. So, that is what I'll be putting out there. In addition to that, if you are looking at how do I get a career in football, there's a number of websites, right? So you have Behind Sport, which is www. behindsport.com. That's basically a platform that highlights the incredible work that goes on in sport. And their focus is around how do we provide an insight and an unrivaled way, which is consumable for all. So basically they're trying to say, look, there's educational content to help those in the industry and outside the industry looking to move in and around that part. You got Jobs in Football. That's a really good website. Again, it provides an in-depth view of the career path within the football industry, and it gives individual access to each career pathway, right? So you can really kind of go business, commercial, really kind of dig into what does that look like and start to kind of bring that together. And you also be able to look at jobs available around the country as well. There's Careers in Sport, which is all about careers in sport, offering educational resources. That's kind of uni advice on the courses, career pathway. You can also view the latest jobs within the footballing industry. And listen, I think where this website is really interesting with Jobs in Football is actually you can look at, the kind of the universities around the country that are the best for each footballing course. So I sat down with Leo, and I remember he found a degree program at Select University, which was around business and sport admin. So that was really around how do you develop and do the leadership, and you can become a coach and all that type of stuff, but also it's looking at the administrative side of sport, as they call it. So, if you're going to commercial, if you're going to sales, if you're going to CEO level, all that type of stuff, you could basically do that kind of degree program. So that's it. And if you are looking to get into a career in sport and you've kind of accessed all these other areas, and you're looking at other things to do, use your LinkedIn profile. Yeah, that would definitely help you. That can definitely support you. Look at, reach out to contacts who got some kind of involvement in football just to talk to them about what they've done. But one of the best rules I say is get involved with your local grassroots team, right? Whether it's the adults or whether it's the kids. I think it's a wonderful space to be in. A lot of them are looking for individuals. So if you want to go into journalism, what a fantastic space to start to write an article for your local journalist, your local team, etc. If it's social media, what does that look like? If you want to, there's so many of them that are looking for sponsorship for kids and all that type of stuff. Can you come up with a way of engaging with the local companies and supporting that team to kind of get their, sponsorship and all that type of stuff. And again, you could do this voluntarily, and that starts to give you some experience and some knowledge of how does that all fit together. And before you know it, that kind of career marches out, because funnily enough, everything starts at grassroots football. Believe me, even the pro footballers themselves, their children start at grassroots football, and then they progress in whichever way they go forward. So hopefully you found the podcast really interesting. We thought we'd cover this this week because it's something that's in the news. It's a really fast growing career, and our plan is to do this again and hopefully inform you on the exciting careers outside of what everybody knows. So think about this as a career off pitch. Is it off the pitch? Yeah, I think that's what our marketing tool is. So off pitch careers outside of being a footballer. Thank you very much.